האם זה באמת סגולה בדוקה? הסגולה ללמוד בזה?
Erev Tov, good evening, Dover Vietcher. We are in the Zera Shimshon on Parshas Vayeshev. We're going to do Os Daled, section number 4. Before we begin, we're going to take a look at a pasuk and a Rashi from towards the beginning of the Parsha. This is Perek Lamed Zayin, pasuk Beis. Eile Toldos Yaakov. These are the generations of Yaakov. Yosef ben Sheva Esrei Shana. Yosef was 17 years old, Haya Roa es Echav Batzon, and he was shepherding with his brothers in the flock. V'hu Na'ar es Bnei Vilha ve'es Bnei Zilpa, and he was a young man with the sons of Bilha and the sons of Zilpa, Neshei Aviv, the wives of his father. Vayove Yosef es Dibasam Ra'a el Avihem, and Yosef brought bad reports about them to his father. So Rashi, on the words V'hu Na'ar, that Yosef was a young man, a lad, Rashi says, Shehaya Ose Ma'ase Na'arus. Why does the Torah call him a lad? Because he would do things that only a youngish boy would do, like a teenager. Misakin Besaro, he would fix his hair. Mamashmesh Be'enov, he would fix his eyes. Sheyia Nire Yofe, in order to look handsome. So because he did those things, he was called a na'ar, a young man. Those are things that only a young man would do, not a fully mature individual. So now, because the Torah with the pasuk with the Rashi talk about Yosef trying to beautify himself and look good, the Zera Shimshon is actually going to talk about the significance of being an attractive person, or perhaps the advantage of not being an attractive person, which we'll see right in the first paragraph. Gemara Perakamed de Sanis, the Gemara in the first chapter of Maseches Sanis Tainus says, Omra le Berate de Kesar le Rabbi Yoshua ben Chananya. The daughter of Caesar said to Rabbi Yoshua ben Chananya, one of the sages, Chochma mifoara Bichli mechoar. You have amazing wisdom in a ugly container, in an ugly vessel, meaning you are an ugly person, but you have amazing wisdom. And that bothered the daughter of Caesar. She didn't understand why such a scholarly, such a brilliant person like Rabbi Yoshua ben Chananya should have been so ugly. Omar le Rabbi Yoshua ben Chananya. Rabbi Yoshua ben Chananya said back to her, Avuch, your father, meaning the Caesar, b'mai rami chamra v'chule. In what does he place his wine, etc.? Now, the Zera Shimshon leaves out, he expects us to know this Gemara, but what Rabbi Yoshua ben Chananya says to the daughter of Caesar is, when your father, the Caesar, has fine wine, does he place it in gold containers or silver containers? And the answer is no. He places it in very inexpensive materials, because wine is preserved better in inexpensive materials than it would be if you tried to preserve wine in, let's say, a gold vessel. So the daughter of Caesar had a response to that. She said, but aren't there people who are good looking, who are attractive, and are learned people? So don't try to tell me that a person can't be handsome and still be learned. Such people exist. So Rabbi Yoshua ben Chananya answered, I havu senu tefei havu gemire. If they were ugly, then they could have been even more learned. So clearly from this Gemara, it would appear that being a good-looking person, being a handsome individual, is a disadvantage when it comes to learning, and somehow holds a person back from accomplishing everything that they could in their Torah studies. And Rabbi Yoshua ben Chananya was explaining that, yes, it's true that he might unfortunately have not been an attractive looking person, but that actually helped him in his become more accomplished in his Torah studies. Next paragraph. Upirish Rashi. Rashi on that Gemara explains, I havu senu. if they would have been ugly, osam noim shehem chachomim, those good-looking people who were wise individuals, those good-looking people who were scholarly, tefei havu gemire, they could have learned more. They could have been more scholarly and more knowledgeable, more erudite. She'efsher lenoeh lehashpil dato, because it is impossible for a good-looking person to lower his opinion of himself, to humble himself, uvali de shichacha, and he will always come to forget his learning. Ad kan Lashono, until here is a quote from Rashi. So Rashi gives us the rationale, the reasoning behind why it's not advantageous to be too good looking, because if a person is good looking and they're concerned about their appearance, it's almost impossible, or Rashi says it is impossible for them to discipline themselves to constantly review the learning and constantly be learning more. It's going to be harder for them to have that discipline if they're, so to speak, distracted by their good looks and have pride and take pride in their good looks. Then they're not going to be able to do the things necessary, have the discipline and humility necessary to be truly, truly learned. They can be learned, but not as much as if they didn't have that issue or that challenge, we might say. Okay, continuing to the next paragraph. V'od pirshu atosvos sham. The commentary of Tosfos offers an additional explanation. Perush, we can explain, im hayusonim hayofi. If they would hate beauty, hayu chachomim biyoser, they would be even greater chachomim. So Tosfos seems to be offering a different interpretation than Rashi's interpretation. Rashi talked about the person actually being unattractive, and Tosfos says that's not what the Gemara means to say. What the Gemara means to say is, if a person hates beauty, they have no use for it. Their attitude is that beauty and good looks are completely irrelevant. It's not something that's at all important to them. Then they can be a greater Talmid Chacham, a greater Torah scholar. V'harif hikshe al perish Rashi. The commentary of the Rif, which is in the Ein Yaakov, this is not the Rif in the back of the Gemara, Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi. This is Rabbi Yoshiyahu Pinto from hundreds of years after the original Rif. He asks a question on Rashi. V'hichriach perish hatosvos, and he concludes that the explanation follows Tosfos's explanation. Now, what the Gemara is saying is that to be really successful in learning, a person must hate beauty and give it no significance and give it no relevance. It's not trying to say the person has to be unattractive. Upeiresh, and the Rif explains, shekavonosam he, that the intention of the commentary of Tosfos was, she'osam hanoim, those attractive people, kevon shehem sonim hayofi, once they hate beauty, even if a person is attractive, but if they hate beauty and they hate attractiveness and it's meaningless to them, then they are on the same status, on the same level, so to speak, as someone who is unattractive. And therefore the words of Torah can remain with them and won't be forgotten. In other words, they will be disciplined, they will lower themselves, they won't be too proud, they won't be distracted by their attractiveness, and they will review as much as necessary and learn as much as is necessary to maintain and increase their Torah learning. Ad kan Lashono. So it would appear here that we have a machlokas between Rashi and Tosfos as to what the Gemara and Tanis meant, and actually what Rabbi Yoshua ben Chananya meant when he said something to respond to the daughter of the Caesar. What exactly did he mean? Did he mean that unattractive people can even learn more than attractive people, and in that sense it's better to be less attractive? Or did he mean as long as a person puts no value on physical attractiveness, then they can be fully successful in learning and maintaining and retaining their Torah learning? That seems to be the argument between Rashi and Tosfos. We'll see that it gets, Zera Shimshon changes that up a little bit. Next paragraph. V'koshe tuva leferish zeh. And there is a big problem with this last explanation of the rif, the imkain, because if that's really what the Gemara was saying, Havale lemeimar, then Rabbi Yoshua ben Hananya should have said, Mishum de inhu sinu, Mishum hachi gemire, because these people hate beauty, they don't put any weight on being attractive. Because of that, they are learned people. If that's what Rabbi Yoshua ben Hananya had said, if he had said those words, that would have been better. Because that would have been a clear answer to the question, de barote de Kezar, to the question of the daughter of the Caesar, the Seirut Hagun, with an appropriate answer. Had he said those words, then that would have been a better answer. Moving to the next paragraph, V'lo lemeimar ihavu senu, and Rabbi Yoshua ben Hananya should not have said, if they hate beauty, then they could be even more knowledgeable. V'loshen hazeh kushya harishona shel barate de Kezar, because according to the actual language of the Gemara, the question of the daughter of the Caesar, bimekoma omedes, it remains in place. Her question wasn't really successfully answered. The Amra lo, because she had said to Rabbi Yoshua ben Hananya, you have amazing wisdom, but it's contained in an ugly vessel. And her intention was to say, Rabbi Yoshua ben Hananya, this Rabbi Yoshua ben Hananya, who was so wise, he should not have been so ugly. In other words, it was almost a question on Hashem. Why did Hashem arrange for this great sage, this great scholar, to be so ugly? According to the explanation of the Rif, she could still ask her question. Lama lo nivra yafeh. Why wasn't Rabbi Yoshua ben Hananya created to be a more attractive person? Shehoyel lo lios kol kachacham. Since he was going to be, meaning he had the characteristics and the drive to be so wise and knowledgeable, bevadai shehoyesone hayofi. Certainly he was someone who didn't put any value on physical attractiveness, and therefore he actually could have been created by Hashem to be a more attractive person, and she wouldn't have had her question of why is so much amazing knowledge put in an ugly vessel. So the Zera Shimshon is saying that there's a problem with the language in the Gemara according to the way the Rif wanted to explain it, and according to that approach, according to that interpretation, we might say, of understanding the Gemara, the question of the daughter of Caesar wasn't really successfully answered. So because of that, he's going to change things. Zera Shimshon's going to change things up in the next paragraph. Umishum hachi, because of this, nira lomar, it appears to say, Shahatosfos lo ba'u lechale klal im Rashi. Zera Shimshon says Tosfos actually did not come to argue with Rashi. We thought Tosfos was coming to say, okay, Rashi said what he said, but now we're going to argue and give a different approach. Zera Shimshon said that's not the best way to learn the Gemara. Rak ba'u lehosif perush al perusho shel Rashi. Tosfos actually came to add an explanation to further clarify what Rashi had said. Umishum hachi kosfu b'techilas divreihem, and because of that, because that was Tosfos's intention, they wrote in the beginning of their words tevas perush, the word perush. Tosfos actually, and this you can go back and see the quote earlier in the piece in the first paragraph. Tosfos actually said perush, meaning I'm going to explain what Rashi meant. Klomar, this means to say, she'af achar perush Rashi, even after the explanation of Rashi, Tzorich perush, we need an explanation. Al lashon de'ihavu senu, on the words in the Gemara, which until now we thought either meant if these people were unattractive or if these people hated attractiveness. So Tosfos is coming and saying, according to Rashi, when we read those words in the Gemara, what Rashi wants us to understand from those words, V'rot Salomar, it means to say, Im hayusonim hayofi, if the people hated attractiveness, gave no importance to attractiveness. V'hainu, and this means, Shemi shehu yofeh lo yisna hayofi, someone who's attractive is not going to normally hate attractiveness. Ve'af eino mechuyev lisno hayofi, and an attractive person isn't even obligated to hate attractiveness. Ela chovoso kach hu. This is a person's obligation. Shetiye dato shefela olav, that his opinion of himself should be low, should be humble. V'lo yispoer b'yofyo klal, and he should not take any pride in his attractiveness. It's not necessary to be unattractive. That's not what the Gemara is saying. That's not Rabbi Yoshua ben Hananya was saying. What's necessary is to not put any extra attention and pay attention and be distracted by one's physical attractiveness. V'zehu kima'at bilti efshar, and it's almost impossible, sheyashpil dato legamre, that an attractive person will be able to completely lower his opinion of himself. Moshe Kosav Rashi, as Rashi wrote, that it's impossible for an attractive person to truly have the not pay any attention to his looks and lower himself and discipline himself to do everything that's necessary to truly become a Talmid Chacham. Aval mishehu koor, but someone who is unattractive, in hachinami shesone hayofi, then we can say, yes, it's easy for that person to pay no attention to the quality of attractiveness. It's much easier to ignore looks if a person is actually not attractive. Ve'im kach keshekosu atosos, and ve'im kain, and if so, keshekosu atosos, when Tosfos wrote, Im hayusonim hayofi, if they hate beauty, kavanosa mamish keperish Rashi. What Tosfos was saying was really exactly what Rashi was trying to say. Dahainu, which is she'im hayu keurim, that if a person like Rabbi Yoshua ben Hananya was not an attractive person, then it's easier for them to be successful in their learning and in maintaining their learning. And if they are attractive, it's harder for them. It's not impossible, but it's harder. V'hashta asi shopir loshen haGemara, and now the language in the Gemara fits in nicely and smoothly. V'hatirat shel Rabbi Yoshua ben Hananya, and the answer that Rabbi Yoshua ben Hananya gave to the daughter of the Caesar, bipishato, can be understood in a simple way. So what the Zera Shimshon did was kind of take a deep dive here in the first part of the first section of the first part into this apparent argument between Rashi and Tosfos in the Gemara in Masechta Tainis that talks about the episode in which the daughter of the Caesar was questioning why Rabbi Yoshua ben Hananya, who was so wise, was such an unattractive, looked so unattractive. And they had seemed to have different opinions. And then the Rif came along and said, Rashi's explanation doesn't really work, and we therefore have to go with Tosfos's explanation. And so Zera Shimshon kind of changed all that and said, actually, that's not true. Tosfos is explaining Rashi and clarifying what Rashi said, and Rashi and Tosfos together have the same interpretation of the Gemara, namely that a person doesn't have to be unattractive in order to be successful Talmid Chacham. However, it does make it easier for that person in a certain way to learn more and be disciplined about his learning and his review of his learning. Next paragraph. Now the Zera Shimshon is going to shift to the issue of someone who seems to be concerned about their looks, namely Yosef. Uvezeh yavor mashakos of Rashi. And through what we just explained, we can understand what Rashi wrote. Al ha-pasuk vihunar. On the pasuk we read in the beginning of this piece, and it's also in the beginning of Parshas Vayeshev, about Yosef being referred to as a na'ar, as a young man. Shemisakein be'enov, that he used to fix up his eyes to make his eyes and his hair look good. Kedei sheyeh nireh yofeh, in order that he would look handsome. That's what Rashi said. There's no escaping that Rashi said that's what Yosef HaTzadik used to do. V'koshe, but this is a problem. Next paragraph. Eich efshar sheyosef HaTzadik yisasek b'devarim b'telem halolu. How is it conceivable that Yosef HaTzadik would be involved with his hair and his eyes and his appearance, which are very worthless tasks? She'afilu kal shebekalim lo yasekein. Even truly unserious individuals, even and truly immature people, don't spend a lot of time on their hair and their eyes. V'lachein kosav acharav, and therefore the pasuk says afterwards, and Rashi comments afterwards. V'Yisrael ohavis Yosef. Yisrael loved Yosef. Arei bar chachim hule, because Yosef was a wise child to him. Why did Yaakov Avinu love Yosef so much? Because he was so wise. He was so knowledgeable. He learned so well and maintained his learning and was so wise. V'im hayachacham, if Yosef was a wise person, a learned person, al korchach tzarech lomar, we have to say, shelo hayachoshev hayofi. He didn't put importance on his on being attractive. The ilav hachi, because if that's not true, meaning if Yosef actually did put a lot of attention on his looks, lo havilo lo aviv lehovoso, then his father wouldn't have loved him mipnei chachmaso, because of his wisdom. Lefisha sofa lehishtakeach, because a person who puts a lot of attention on their looks, in the end will forget their learning. She'eno miskayemes, because the learning is not maintained, ela b'pachol shebekelim, unless it's in the inferior type of kalim, which is what Yoshua ben Hananya said. His lack of attractiveness helped him learn and be successful and maintain his learning. Kedamrin and Hotzam, Perikama Tanis, as it said in the first chapter of Masechta Tanis, which is the little piece excerpt from the Gemara that this piece opened with. So here, if we stopped here, we'd have a problem, which is Rashi seems to clearly say that Yosef paid attention to his looks and messed around with his hair and his eyes to look the best way. And Zera Shimshon says, well, that contradicts the fact that his father loved him because he was such a chacham, and a chacham wouldn't do those things. So now the Zera Shimshon is going to answer that question. Definitely, we are compelled to say, Shema shekosa vihunar, when the Torah says that Yosef was a lad, and Rashi says that means he paid attention to his looks, kedei sheyeh nireh yofeh, in order that he would be handsome, eino muvan kipshuto. It should not be understood literally. Do not take Rashi at face value that Yosef wanted to look good. Ella k'moshe kosvu b'medrash Rabbah. Rather, the real explanation of this is what it writes in the Medrash Rabbah. Al pasuk, on the pasuk, Vayehi Yosef yifei toar v'yifei mare. There's another pasuk in which it says Yosef was a very good form and very good appearance. And the Medrash v'samichle, and near that pasuk it says Vatisa eshes Adonov, the wife of Yosef's master Potiphar lifted up her eyes and began to look at Yosef in a desirous manner. So the Torah tells us Yosef was attractive, and it tells us that Potiphar's wife began to think about how to seduce him. What is going on there? Sha'amar Yosef. The Medrash Rabbah says that Yosef said to himself, Abba nisnasa, zikeni nisnasa. My father, who was Yaakov Avinu, was tested, and my grandfather, that was Yitzchak, was tested. What does it mean was tested? So Yaakov Avinu had tremendous challenges in life with his brother Esav, with his father, with going to the house of Lavan, with everything that happened there. Yaakov's entire life was full of all these challenges, and he was tested, and he never lost his trust and faith in Hashem. And Yosef's grandfather, that was Yitzchak, was of course tested in many ways, but the ultimate test was the Akedah. And at that point, he was willing to give his life without any hesitation. And so these men, the Yosef's father and grandfather, were tested, and they passed the tests with flying colors. But I, Aini Misnase, I have not been tested. Yosef felt badly that he was not tested because he wanted to be tested in a serious way and to pass and rise to the occasion, and he felt that that would propel him to greatness the same way it did for his father and his grandfather, for Yaakov Avinu and Yitzchak Avinu. Miyad, immediately, Vatisa Esha Sadonov, immediately Hashem gave him the test of a major test in which his master's wife, Potiphar's wife, did everything she could to try and seduce him, and that turned out to be a very real test, according to the Medrash and according to Chazal. But Yosef passed the test and ended up fleeing and running from that challenge. Next paragraph. Umachshavos shel Yosef. Yosef's intention, lemashmesh be'enov, when he made up his eyes, kedei sheyeh nireh yofeh, in order to look good, lo hayu, this was not intended, ela kedei lahosif koach ba'avodaso yisparach. It was only intended to add to his strength in serving Hashem. It wasn't what it looked like. It wasn't what we think when we read Rashi, that he was immature, that he was paying a lot of attention to his looks, that he wanted to look good. No, he did want to look good, but he had a spiritual motive. He wanted to look good in order to be tested by his looks and in order to pass that test and increase his avodas Hashem. Because through his good looks, he was able to be tested, velamod b'nisyono, and to stand up and prevail in his test. Machmas or Toraso hameshamer oso, because of the light of his Torah that protected him. V'Yisrael ohavis Yosef mikol banav, and because of that, his father Yaakov loved him more than his other sons. Arei bar chachim hule, as we saw this quote from Rashi previously, because Yosef was so wise. Shebiyoso chacham, because he was wise, al korchen lomar shahayis adato shefela alav. That teaches us that he was a very humble person. You might think caring about his appearance means he was prideful. No, that's not true. Caring about his appearance was a way to be tested, and he was humble about his appearance. He wasn't prideful. Afal pisha yofeh. He was humble and modest, even though he was so good looking. Ve'in hachinami shemitzad zeh hayosone hayofeh. And even though it's true that from this perspective we can say that Yosef was someone who put no value on appearance, v'af mitzad acher, and even from the other perspective, masha misakin saro, when he was concerned about fixing up his hair and his eyes, lo hayikadesha tazuach dato alav, it wasn't in order that he should be proud and feel better about his appearance because now he looks so good, ela lechavona tova, but rather it was for a good purpose, to be tested, to pass the test, and to grow in his avodas Hashem, and to grow to greater spiritual heights as his father Yaakov did, and as his grandfather Yitzchak did. So we're going to stop here in the next half of the section, just to give us a little foretaste and appetizer for when we're able to do it, God willing. The Zera Shimshon talks about the fact that Yaakov Avinu gave a special robe to Yosef, and the Gemara says that's not generally a good thing for parents to do, to show favoritism. And Zera Shimshon will discuss what exactly Yaakov did with this special code and why he did it, and what his motivations were when he did so. Yashar Koch for joining in the learning in the Zera Shimshon this week, and we look forward to learning again in the Zera Shimshon Be'ezus Hashem with God's help again on next week's Parsha.